So yeah, I'm sitting here with Burke, and we're just going to start looking through how our Dante configuration is set up and what the different names are, why they're named the way they are, what goes where, and who knows how long this video is going to be. But hopefully if you're interested in learning a little bit more about Dante, this will, at Cascade, this will be a great resource for where to start. So you can currently see all of the machines that we have connected, and you can see I just hit the refresh button because machines upstairs have since been turned on since the last time it was refreshed. Okay. So sometimes if you don't see something that you're like, I'm pretty sure this is on and it should be there, you can just in Dante controller hit this refresh button and that'll bring you right back up to speed. So yeah, let's just go through what each of these titles are, why we named them the way that we did, and then we'll start looking at some patching. So the 57th Mac Pro is Scott Studio. So if we're multi-tracking on a Sunday and like what you would have for like online worship, every individual component, that's being recorded back there. So usually it'll be QL5, the audio console, sent back to Scott Studio. CC Record is the Spotify machine. It was previously used for recording all the multi-tracks, but it doesn't have a very large hard drive. And so it's just kind of continued on with the name. We'll probably, and it won't forever be Spotify, so we're just not going to change it for now. But CC Tracks is the Ableton machine, so anything tracks related, which is the machine we're currently on. So yeah, like you can see, we've got Ableton and SoundGrid, Super Rack, and all that stuff. That all lives on this same machine, which is CC Tracks. PVP is the machine upstairs where if we're showing video content, that's where our audio is going to be coming from for those videos. The RedNet is a studio configuration thing for Scott. So that's also Studio World. Worship Center QL5 is the name of the console. We could put Yamaha in front of it, but it's the only thing that's going to say QL5 that's on the Dante network. So that's our audio console. And then our last four things are the Rios, which are 8 inputs each, and those are our stage boxes. So those are the physical XLR inputs that the console's looking for. So the sub snakes on stage in the troughs plug into the Rios. And so we've labeled some of them, but we've left some of them intentionally blank, and it just says the input number. So you can see here, like for the first Rio, we know that it's always going to be the drum kit. And so we've gone through and labeled kick, snare, floor tom, rack, all of that. But then you can see once we get to Rio 2 and Rio 3, we've intentionally left it unlabeled because we're like, we know that the stage is going to shift, and we don't want to be locked in and make it confusing of like, well, Vox 2 is usually input 13, but this week it's input 14. Then you leave it there for 2 weeks and you're like, wait, which one was it? So we've just intentionally left it blank. The subsnakes in the floor have the patch on it. And so if someone's like, hey, I plugged into input 10, you would come over here and be like, oh, Rio 10. It's the exact same thing. And if you went to the console and you chose your input, Dante 10, that's what is patched to the QL5. So hopefully that isn't too confusing, and maybe it would just take some tries of patching and you'll get it. But then the other things that won't change is also the back end. So handheld 1, handheld 2, and then the additional headset units. And then nothing is plugged into Rio 31 or 32. So if we absolutely needed another channel, then you could take, like what we were talking about earlier, one of the additional sub snakes and plug it into 31 or 32, patch it on the QL5. So that's as simple as the inputs are. The only output that exists that isn't an input is this Avio unit, which we are sending a board mix from the QL5 up to Video World. So we've done some additional processing in Wave SoundGrid right here that's going to Video World just to really raise the volume and lower the dynamics a little bit for the online version. And so that's what that is. That plugs, or it goes Dante Ethernet connection straight to stereo left and right XLR cables that go into the Blackmagic video switcher. So yeah, as long as those are checked, then that is the only, oh, sorry, I'm so wrong. The live mix units, very, very important. They're not able to send anywhere, but they can receive signal, which is great. And so we are sending from the QL5 to the live mix units. And so you can see currently what all of the individual channels are. Something that we're going to change that's probably already changed by the time anyone's seeing this video is the E kit or the drum kit we're going to put in the overhead left and right mix just to get a channel back so that we can add the second miscellaneous channel to the live mix. But then you can, if you start looking through here, these are the QL5 outputs. So you can see the kick is sent to the kick on the live mix. And then if you go to the snare, it's set to the snare. And like if you just start going down the line, you can see everything lines up. So if you absolutely had to change something and you're like, we need headset 3 in the live mix, it's like, we don't want to touch Dante, but if the world is ending, you could come in and change it. We're just going to make sure that we change it back. The only reason that we're not changing this is we can do everything using mixes on the QL5. We never want to touch Dante. Like it's basically set, and it will only make our lives more complicated if we jump in and start changing patching. But yeah, those are for sure the only two things on here. So the rest of it's just going to be looking through and being like, okay, how are we sending all of these individual units? And which tracks are we sending and which ones aren't we sending? Because on a Dante network, we have a maximum of 512 channels that we're able to send at one time before we exceed our, it's not gigabit speed because there's a little bit of bandwidth required just for the protocol and other stuff. But that's the max amount of channels that you can send at one time. And when you start counting up how many we're actually at, we're getting there. So a lot of the times we're not sending all of the tracks, or we're not sending something that could be combined down to a submix that we have access to later. So when Scott's mixing down, or myself, I don't know who's going to be doing it, a Sunday service, and we need access to all the individual tracks, we'll just drag them in from Google Drive and line them back up with the song precisely, instead of just raw multi-tracking everything coming out of the console. But yeah, you can see all the individual elements. And I'm not sure why that one isn't patched. I'm pretty sure it should be, but I'm not going to click it right now. Yeah, so whenever you see this little orange triangle thing show up, it just means, hey, I was patched to something that I currently don't see on the network. And so usually it's just like, if I know where it's supposed to be, just click it once, which will unpatch it, and click it again, and it'll be happy. Since we're recording right now, I'm not going to do that because that's bad habit, and just figure out why it's happening. Or if someone else changed something and didn't say why, like check with myself, check with Scott, check with Burke, be like, okay, why am I seeing this? Versus just changing it. And then I wish that there was a video output out of this console, but there's not. So I can't like record and like show people on the screen. But the way that the QL5 is sending out is using direct outs. So if I jump over to the console really quick, bring my microphone with me, and let's say that I click on acoustic guitar. You can see the direct out section, and if I open it, oh my goodness, why can't I click it? There we go. You can see that we're going direct out on Dante 11. Okay. If I look over here on the computer and I come down to 11, it shows that it's acoustic guitar. Okay. So the direct outs directly correlate, which is a little bit of a pun. That word isn't, yeah, you get it. Whatever Dante number output we have going for direct outs is what shows up in Dante. Okay. The yellow color does not mean anything. It's just user defined. So, yep, it just helps us navigate the console a little bit faster. But yeah, and like I said, I would highly encourage just exploring and asking questions. Like just sit in Dante controller for a while, being like, okay, why are we sending PvP or like internally trying to figure this out? We don't need 57th. We need QL5. You can see for coming in, going out PvP channels 1 and 2, and we're going into the console 57 and 58. Where would I expect to find that? And so if I jumped in and went to my PvP channel, we could look up at our input settings. And you can see we actually have a lot of options for input settings. It's like we can assume that we only have Dante, but there are actually 32 physical XLR ports on the back of this too. So it can be helpful to just scroll through and familiarize yourself with what types of inputs there are. And obviously in this case, we want Dante because we know that's coming in over Dante. We've checked out of PvP is coming in to the QL5 channels 57, 58. So I can see that. Boom, I'm in channel 57. And this is only the left channel that is linked with the right channel. So when I move up the left, it moves up the right. Sorry, my mind just went blank, which happens more often than I would like. It's like we're rolling and gone. Earlier we talked about like how the sub snakes are laid out on the floor, that we have 5 sub snakes, and everything is from the audience perspective, from front of house perspective. Previously it was stage left and right's perspective, but no one on stage needs to know what their input is. Like the benefit is front of house knowing what the input is. And so we flipped that, and we even have that currently up on the screen, so that when people show up, when they're like, oh, which one am I? Like they don't even have to ask. They're like, oh, I know exactly. So I can start like dialing in my live mix even before anyone shows up. And hopefully that will just continue to be helpful over time. I mean, that's the majority of it for Dante. And then just making sure, like if you're not seeing this for some reason, like making sure that Dante virtual sound card is actually on to be able to send to the console. This has been off a few times. And it's totally fine to like even quit. Like Dante virtual sound card will keep running. You have to hit stop for it to actually stop. And if you're not seeing anything in Dante controller, you might have to go and check your primary. Oh, come on. Sometimes when the dock opens, it doesn't like to be friendly. When you open the primary, why can't I open it? Weird. It opened eventually, but sometimes like you can see how many different network connections there are. And if someone's like panicking or something, and it's like EN0 is what and that's just the local LAN port on the Mac Pro that's sitting back here. And we don't have a secondary interface connected. So that's all we need. And then you can hit refresh, and then everything should be there. Sometimes if we have a mismatch in settings between different stuff, it can be helpful to do a power cycle of the machines that have created like their own little it's not a subnet technically, but have their own dedicated IP addresses that don't end up on the same IP like addresses as the rest of the crowd. Restarting the rogue ones so that when they rejoin, they slave to the IP address of the console. Which I've only seen once in the entire time and I've been here, I think 5 months or around 5 months. We've both been on staff 2 days. So,
now, is there anything you need to do in case the machine you have to reboot the machine for whatever reason? Will the Dante card start up automatically and everything will work? Or is there additional things you need to check or do?
Yeah, everything should work basically immediately. The only thing that probably won't prompt you or just work right off on startup is Super Rack. And so you'll just click that in the bottom and it'll say, what do you want to open a show? And you're like, yes. And that show is also on the desktop. So you can double click from the desktop and it will launch right away for you.
Okay. And that launches the show?
Yes, okay. It does. Yep. That is the show file. And we can go over Super Rack, I guess, a little bit. It's not super complicated stuff that we're doing. PSE, primary source, expander, I think it's expander, not enhancer. is basically just an intelligent voice gate of when someone's up close to a microphone and singing, it like lets the signal through. And I don't know what the algorithm is or whatever, but it's like it knows when people like walk away from the mic and it just automatically ducks for you versus a gate in the console. It's like, I just know how loud it is, and if you're this loud, I let you through, and if not, then no. But this seems to be somehow tonal, or I don't really know how it works, but it works, and so we use it, and it helps fight feedback and just get a better noise to signal ratio. Yeah. We're using Waves Tune, very slow settings, and in chromatic mode. We're not changing keys between each song. And that's not because we can't. It's the band likes to play off chords that don't belong in the key of the song, and so sometimes they'll go to like a in between chord, and none of the notes that Autotune's trying to move them to are correct, and so their voices don't match the chords that their instruments are playing. So that's why Scott wants it left on chromatic. And then these are just the settings that we use for. That we found sounds the most natural for the widest range of singers. There are certain singers that are like spot on, and a faster tune time like really locks them in and feels good. But then there's some singers that struggle with pitch a little bit more, and we don't want to lock them into a note that maybe they're trying to warm up to. And then there are only a few people that I use RVox on that can really tighten them up just a little bit more than everyone else. It's just a compressor. And then F6 is a dynamic EQ. So when someone gets louder in a certain range, you could use the same thing with a multi-band compressor, but I like the Q drop off versus a whole frequency range jumping up and down, like just a nice soft. And yeah, you can be very surgical with it, and I think it sounds great. So, and we're currently building up this library of presets for people. So we'll just come in and be like, okay, boom, I know that Allison is on Vox 4 or whatever. And then I just recall from this preset list, I'll go down and find Allison. Cool. And that'll be as much prep as you have to do for a weekend versus having to dial in a bunch of really complex settings. Like no one wants to do that, which is a great time to talk about gain, I guess, in the console. And I'm currently making a video, which I'll probably link below this, on why we set gain. But we're shooting on the console for our numbers to be between -18 and -12. And if we bump up to -6, that's okay, but it needs to be like rare. And the reason that we set gain that way is like we have compression settings and outboard settings, and like if our gain's super low, we're not going to hit the thresholds for any of our compressors. And so that's the very first thing that we do when we're line checking or interacting with the band, saying, hey, can you turn up, play the loudest that you're going to give me? Or that's why vocalists go and warm up beforehand so that they're ready to come and like belt into a mic, so that, because if we change the gain afterwards, or like, oh shoot, we were off a little bit, we change all of their in-ear mixes. Okay. And there's no way to get around that. Yeah. And so we want to get it right in the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes max. And so when instruments start showing up beforehand, I'm trying to work through with them of saying, hey, can we line check really quick? Give me the most signal that you're going to give me for the entire night. I bring them up in between -18 and -12 for their loudest stuff, max of -6. Like if I see -6, I'm probably going to turn them down a little bit. But then it's amazing how much of the console just works after that from all of the settings. Like as long as stuff hits in kind of the right range, it should be somewhat similar week to week in terms of sound. I mean, that's probably most of the stuff that we would want to cover Dante wise. The whole idea around Dante is we funnel everything to the console. And when I showed up here originally, everything was a 1-to-1 patch. And so like coming from the Rios, it was patched to the QL5, but then the Rios were also patched to the studio, and the Rios were also patched to the live mix units. And it's like all of a sudden you have to patch 4 things. And if you make a mistake on one of them, like some whole one thing doesn't work somewhere. And so the reason that we're going to the QL5 is all we have to do is change one input on the QL5, and then it distributes correctly to the rest of the network. And so hopefully that will save people a lot of time and a lot of heartache of being like, what did I do wrong? But yeah, hopefully this was a good first kind of installment and kind of getting our beaks wet, or I don't know what the right term for it is. But yeah, that's what I got. And yeah, we'll probably change DCA layouts and stuff, but maybe we'll do a camera over the top of the console when we kind of do a console walkthrough. Cool. There we go.